I bet you didn't think I'd come back so soon with Chapter 7 of Sun Tzu's The Art of War, but here I am. And like the previous videos in which I'm covering the book with a little bit more intensity, I am going to just focus in on a few things here. The first thing I want to highlight is the general message to be prepared, and to be prepared in every way you can, and to not take more of a risk than you need to, or at least understand the risk before you take it. He says, for instance, rolling up your armor, rushing forward without stopping day or night, covering twice the usual distance for an advantage of 100 kilometers away, that is for a target of 100 kilometers away. The general will be captured, the strong will arrive first, the weak will lag behind, and as a rule, only 1/10 of your army will arrive. So just knowing the capabilities of a large group of people, he's saying that most likely if you go very hard and fast for something 100 kilometers away, you will not arrive in time. And you will arrive with far less than you need, because people just can't do it. He says if one struggles for an advantage 50 kilometers away, the general of the front forces will be thwarted, and as a rule, only 1/2 will arrive. If one struggles for an advantage 30 kilometers away, then 2/3 of the army will arrive. Well, you get the picture. Now, he's not saying that you should never go for something 100 kilometers away, but he's saying you need to understand exactly how much you'll have when you get there, and not, again, engage in this sort of wishful thinking of or this sort of egotistical notion that you have all of the answers so that your operation will go perfectly, when if we look at the history of these things, there's always losses. Now, inexplicably, after this content about how the advantage that's 30 kilometers away or closer will give you more of an advantage yourself, he then says, therefore, one who does not know the intentions of the rulers of the neighboring states cannot secure alliances. Well, I'm nitpicky. I think this might be the translation, and I don't have another copy here to check the translation against another one, and I should, but therefore usually means that you're summing up and concluding from the content above, and the sentence here doesn't have any relationship that I can see to the content above. It might if you were talking about how the intentions of the rulers of neighboring states could put you at advantage or disadvantage relative to the distance of your target. But he says it's about securing alliances. Well, anyway. Moving on, he talks a little bit about the need to pay attention to terrain. He says one who does not know the mountains and forests, gorges and defiles, swamps and wetlands cannot advance the army. One who does not use local guides cannot take advantage of the ground. So in every way possible, the general needs to know the terrain and should use local guides, as people from the local area who he may pay or who may have an interest in helping him, to be able to understand the lay of the land in every way possible. Again, I point out every once in a while this advice can be used in other settings, and this would certainly be a case where it can be used in political and social settings and economic settings. People who do not pay attention to the so-called terrain, who do not understand the so-called lay of the land, whatever it may be, by not doing their homework, by not talking to enough people, by not taking the time to understand the actual situation and the people around them. That's so important. Eyeballing and sitting down with people and talking to them is something that folks don't like to do these days, but the people who do are an extreme advantage to those who do not. In the business world, in economics and politics, in any situation of competition, and also in social life, of course. Okay, now he says the Book of Military Administration says, it is in it. I assume this is another ancient work, or an ancient work that he had access to. I don't know what the reference is though. But it says, it is because words cannot be clearly heard in battle, drums and gongs are used, and it is because troops cannot see each other clearly in battle, flags and pennants are used. Therefore, in night battles, use torches and drums, and in day battles, use flags and pennants. Drums, gongs, flags, and pennants are used to unite men's eyes and ears. Well, of course, what we use now are more sophisticated means of communication. Oh, wait a minute. Well, for the most part, what we use now are more sophisticated means of communication, but that doesn't mean that communication isn't a problem. Even though we have the ability to speak directly or to send out some sort of bulletin or some message that everybody can read or hear and understand through electronic communications, doesn't mean that everybody's going to interpret it the same way or everybody's going to be focused in the same way. So the larger message here for us is we have to find some way of making sure that our troops or our followers, the people who are attempting to hear the order, really hear and understand the order. Don't assume that just because you send out that email or whatever it may be, that the people on the other end actually got it, read it, thought about it, etc. Or don't assume that just because you sat behind your desk and made an order to somebody else that person's going to go out and relay that order to others in the same manner. Not at all. Probably not. Most of the times not. So being able to communicate very, very clearly and unambiguously, and especially in the case of battle or in any sort of conflict situation, this is extremely important because there's no time to correct in some cases. He concludes that section saying, therefore in night battles use many torches and drums, and in day battles use many flags and pennants in order to influence men's eyes and ears. Well, he certainly has a notion of people's psychology too. Lots of flash gets people's attention. And the final thing I want to talk about here is he gets into the use of what in another translation I've used is mood, or here he talks about managing energy or directing energy. So the energy or mood, I guess you could substitute mood for energy depending upon how it sounds to you, but he says the energy of the army can be dampened and the general's mind can be dampened. Therefore in the morning energy is high, but during the day energy begins to flag, and in the evening energy is exhausted. Therefore those skilled in the use of force avoid the enemy's high energy and strike when the energy is exhausted. This is the way to manage energy. So you see what this requires of you and your people is to go against nature. You need to understand the general mood or energy, the psychology of people in order to know when best to strike with your enemy. But at the same time, you have to have such command of your troops through the use of communication and discipline, which we will be talking more about, that they will go against their own nature, and at a time when they should be exhausted, they have the energy to attack, and to attack well against an enemy that is camping and beginning to sleep, basically. Again, you know, we get into territory here where there's a certain amount of subterfuge, a certain amount of what he calls deception in the advice here that seemed unfair to certain Western ears, sort of inexplicably, considering the fact that warfare is warfare no matter where you are. Deception exists, but in the Western military theory, there's a great concentration on justice and in sort of almost well, fairness in battle, going back to the Middle Ages and moving forward in just war theory. And so this type of advice rubs against that kind of teaching. But he advises that if you should wait for the disorder of your enemy, wait for the enemy to be caught off guard. He says this is the way to manage the mind, that is the mentality of the enemy. And again, it requires you to have control, a lot more control over your own people. So wait for your enemy to be fatigued, wait for them to be hungry. In other words, catch them when they are at their weakest, which of course is the way to win in these situations. So he concludes saying, therefore the principles of warfare are: do not attack an enemy that has the high ground. Do not attack an enemy that has his back to a hill, because he'll be too desperate. You remember before, that's death ground. And they'll fight to the death, and then you could be in trouble. Do not, he says elsewhere, by the way, leave an outlet when you surround the enemy so that they can flee, because again, otherwise they will be on death ground and you will face a fierce enemy. Do not pursue feigned retreats, and do not attack elite troops, and do not swallow the enemy's bait, which the latter really kind of says it all. The successful leader has to anticipate that the people he's competing with are engaging in deception too. And this is where Sun Tzu becomes pretty cagey, or it's hard to know, but yet he's absolutely right. I was going to say it's hard to know exactly how to deal with this advice, but he's absolutely right, of course, that you have to assume your enemy is, well, you should assume your enemy's smarter than you every time. You know that old saying, never underestimate your enemy? I say never underestimate anybody. Never underestimate anybody or anything, and that is the key to success. And I think Sun Tzu gets that point across quite well throughout this book. Do not ever become so arrogant as to think that you understand the entire situation. Be very careful and remain humble in the sense of realizing that you may be outsmarted, so you have to be on your guard. Anyway, look for impossible situations and traps. Assume that they are coming. So we have a lot of different messages going on in this chapter, but I think some really good advice and some transferable advice. Next time I may tackle chapter 8 and 9 together, because chapter 8 is kind of short, but we shall see. Chapter 9 is kind of long. All right. Bye.